Hello and welcome to Free Spirit. Today we come to you from Contemporary Lobster House, offering short-term accommodation for that ultimate luxurious experience in trendy Camps Bay, Cape Town. In our first story this week, we meet author, playwright and student Nadia Davids, winner of the 2003 Rosalie van der Gucht Award for New Directors. Nadia's expressions of love, anger, family and life experiences have always come through her writing. We join her now to find out more.
I started writing when I was a little girl, and my mom bought me this book. This first journal that I ever got was from her when I was about 8 years old or something, and she wanted me to write down all the poems that I'd ever written and sort of keep some kind of, I don't know, archive of my own work, and I actually still have that one. I don't know where exactly the love of writing comes from. I mean, I know that it's something inside of me. I suppose it was also fostered by the way in which my parents taught my sister and I that reading was this amazing, wonderful space to go into, and that making up stories is an incredible thing to do as well. So my father used to constantly make up stories to tell us, and my mother was always reading to us, and we were always sort of taught that buying books was like buying food. It was equivalent, that you had to nourish your soul and your body at the same time. It's a wonderful privilege to be able to tell stories in a way that people are interested and invested in seeing themselves in as well. When I was in my honours year for my drama course, I did a play about my grandparents' relationship. I think it was at that moment that I really sort of understood how deeply my family informs my work. At Her Feet, I think, was born out of multiple spaces. It was, you know, there was a political space. It was a response to a very particular time in sort of global history as well. It was written a year after the attacks on the Trade Center. We were having tons of images of Muslim women being sort of bombarded by the media constantly, and particularly of these sort of Afghan women, and they always looked so sort of oppressed and behind like fabric and cloth, and everybody started having very, very specific ideas about what it meant to be a Muslim woman. It was very difficult for me to look at these images and not think, but that's not how I feel, and I'm not necessarily identifying with these women in the way that maybe the West is perceiving them.
My name is Azra Al-Jamal, and I have just been killed. I have sat in the middle of a circle of 40 men, and I have just been killed.
The play rotates around this Jordanian girl who's imaginary figure who has been stoned to death, and the women in the play in Cape Town are answering the question of how they deal with what's happened to her.
If you want to live in a world where the women are all covered up, you probably wouldn't even be able to work here.
We had an amazing response from everybody, particularly from the women, and that was just wonderful, because people were saying, oh, I see myself in this character, and I see my daughter in that character, and that's my niece, and, you know, those kinds of things. In some ways, I quite like the fact that I never know when I'm going to understand now's the moment I'm going to write, or when I can set the time aside for it, because it sort of means that it's always a surprise. There's always this delightful surprise, and it's almost as if you're going into this terrain and it's completely unmapped, and you don't know where the character's going to take you, you don't know what journey it's going to go on, and you're almost as excited as the reader's going to be, because you arrive and you're like, oh, okay, and that's a nice feeling. I was born in Cape Town, and what I've noticed about my work is that all the work that I produce, it's actually meaningful to me. In some ways, actually resonates very deeply with my family and very deeply with Cape Town and my relationship with the landscape, and the way in which my family seems to have created a text in some way on the landscape that then I feed back into my work.
That's your original street, Hanover Street. And that's the street where your grandfather's surgery was.
Oh, I see.
Okay, and of course, these are all the original street signs of District 6.
I think the sort of emotional connection that I have with that work is that my family on both sides of my mom and my dad's family at some point suffered some kind of exodus or removal from that particular place. And growing up in Warmer Estates, I grew right up next to this sort of vast space of rubble. So I think it sort of became quite entrenched on my consciousness from an early age that there was this scar on Cape Town's landscape, and what does it mean, and how do you go about healing that in ways that sort of go beyond just a physical process of restitution. It's actually about an emotional and spiritual coming back to a particular place. People often think that a mother's desire for a son is to please her husband. Not so. We don't want girls because we don't want our children to be prisoners of their own bodies. My sense of spirituality, I think, is hugely shaped by the kinds of ethical lessons I was taught as a child by my parents, and there's sort of two facets to it. There are those things that you learn at your parents' knees and on the, you know, at their feet and that kind of thing, and then there's the other part, which is my creativity and what that means to me and the kind of role that plays for me. And the two sort of feed into each other as well, because I know with my parents, when we were growing up, we always had a wide, diverse range of people around us: Hindu, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, gay, straight, black and white, and that kind of thing. And my parents were always very clear about the fact that everybody has a right to practice and to find their way to God on their own terms, and that one can have very strong ethical positions about certain moral things, but one mustn't judge how somebody else will find their path in that way. And I think that that's really helped with the way in which I understand character and the way in which I formulate my characters, is because while I might present people to the world through my work who have a kind of a moral ambiguity about them, or they find themselves in ambiguous positions, I'm presenting them without judgment. I mean, I might have very clear ideas about what their position is, but it's in an unjudgmental, loving way. So, yeah. And I think it's a very spiritual thing to be in a place where you can write, because you are, or create any kind of artwork. And I mean, I think that art is something that should be available to absolutely everybody. I think everybody has a creative impulse. But I think the moment that you're actually making something appear where once there was nothing, it's an intensely spiritual experience to do that. And you do connect with something, I think, outside of yourself. And then you connect with other people, which is also so important.